Great. Well, we appreciate it very much, and we appreciate the time. Hopefully, not everybody has the post-lunch fades or PLFs, as we used to call them, that you're wide awake and ready to finish this off today. So we're really excited to be here from Within 3 to be helping to sponsor this as well. We just enjoy the time and opportunity we have to speak with you. And today, what Isaac and I are going to be talking about is engaging your key medical device stakeholders. So your KOLs, your HCPs, your internal stakeholders, as well as the external stakeholders, and how to do that on a compliant and secure virtual technology. So let's just quickly, let me introduce myself and Isaac. Again, my name is Kim Hale. I am from Salt Lake City, Utah. That's where I'm based. Within 3, by the way, is based out of Cleveland, Ohio. But I have been Within 3 now for about a year, have been in the medical device industry for about 30 years and have loved every moment that I've spent in this. And I've worked for companies such as Medtronic, Baxter, Smiths Medical, to name a few. And Isaac, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, appreciate it. And hey, Mark, you pronounced my last name correctly. So, hey, kudos to you. So I'm Isaac Bornacek. I hail from Las Vegas. I'm glad to be on here today. I have about 20 years or so of medical device, of pharmaceutical sales and marketing and management experience, work with companies like Medtronic, Edwards Life Sciences, Merck, and so on. So just happy to be here and looking forward to a good session. So thanks, Kim.
Great. Thanks, Isaac. Appreciate it. So what are we going to talk about today? I think really for today, we're going to talk a little bit about how virtual engagement has really changed over the last year and a half. How we were all forced to be able to do some things that we had kind of thought about in the past. I mean, all of us probably on the meeting today had sat on a Zoom call prior to COVID. We all had been in some sort of virtual engagement, but then we were suddenly told, hey, by the way, you can't come to work anymore and you got to do everything from home. And everybody started to panic. Everybody kind of went back to going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And things such as Teams came around and they said, well, it's part of Office 365. So it's free, sort of. So we're just going to go ahead and use that. Or we're going to go back to the standby, which was Zoom. And so virtual engagement became exactly what we're doing today, where you actually are on live calls with people while you're still sitting at home in your office. And by the way, Isaac and I are not next to each other at the Within 3 offices. Just wanted to let you know that, right now. So really what took place was back in 2019 was the real-time engagement, the live meetings, the in-person meetings. My last one was in Washington, D.C. In December of 2019. There were 25 physicians sitting in a room. And it was really interesting. In a 2-hour meeting, only 2 of those 25 physicians really spoke up and had a lot to say. Which again, I thought was very interesting in an in-person meeting is how do you track that ROI? How do you get total engagements from everybody that's sitting in the room? Or again, like virtual meetings, there were just a few people participate. So then we moved, after COVID hit, the pandemic came around, we moved into the real-time virtual engagement, the webinars, the webcasts, the web meetings that we were doing. And we all became very good at them. Just like on today, we're having this trade show that was normally done live a couple of years ago. We're doing it in a virtual space now. But along with that came its own issues. If you were trying to engage with somebody that lived in China and you happen to live in Southern California, now suddenly you had issues such as days. You had issues that's trying to coordinate times. You now have issues of taking KOLs and HCPs away from their patients, away from their practices. And so it came with its own set of issues at that point in time. And then how are we going to kind of overcome that? How are we going to be able to move beyond and form something what we kind of call a hybrid engagement or an anytime virtual engagement, where people can log in whenever they feel like. They can come in early in the morning, late at night. They can do it on their phone. They can as they're walking between patients at the hospital, and they're not taking time out of their extremely busy day, because for all physicians, obviously time is money. So, and not just physicians, but for patients, for payers, researchers, internal stakeholders and external stakeholders as well. So, Isaac, what I would like to be able to do is kind of talk with you a little bit more about, how a virtual hybrid session evolves and what is really a virtual hybrid session from your point of view.
It's a good question. And these are questions that actually I've been asked quite a bit going back to last year and, of course, into this year. And I'm sure we'll be asked going into 2022 as a lot of people trying to figure out exactly what a virtual hybrid is. Well, Kim, typically a virtual hybrid discussion will start off with a webcast. I mean, we've seen that we're not going to do away with webcasts. This is something that's here to stay. Webcasts we used before, as the slide you just went over and went through, they're going to be here to stay. And I think for good reason. Usually they last about 45 minutes or so. There's typical introductions, expectations. You put a name with a face. There's still some of that human interaction that I think we all crave. Again, you and I aren't right next door to each other, but we will see each other here in another month or two, which I'm looking forward to. At the same time that live webcast kicks off, we're also going to kick off the overtime discussion. And so these hybrid meetings are going to be, again, both a live and an overtime discussion. That overtime discussion is going to have Q&A, insights, discussions that's going to last for anywhere from a week to 2 weeks. Typically, it's about 2-week time frame that we see. What is really great is, again, it's a convenient time for advisors and moderators, those who are participating in these sessions, to meet. And they don't have to necessarily worry about grabbing that next Zoom call or leaving one meeting to run to another. Or you think about a surgeon in a case trying to get out of one case to get to another, or is late to a case or something like that. And then once this, typically about 3/4 of the way through, we see a progress check-in, if you will, another webcast that lasts, again, about 45 to 60 minutes. And final tasks, again, are not just laid out, but also agreed upon and made sure that all those who are participating understand what their marching orders are. And they have their final deliverables that they complete. And then finally, what typically happens after the session closes is that there is a results call. Within 3, we do a results call on every session. We make sure that the information that our clients have received, they can make sense of, and they have a really good understanding. So typically, Kim, I think when you ask about a virtual hybrid, this is the way that I think we look at it. This is the way that most of the folks that we work with look at it. And so hopefully it's helpful for those in the future as they plan for these types of sessions.
So let me ask you one other question then. What have you seen as far as in the device world, specifically virtual engagement trends? What's kind of taking place out there? What have we been pushed into doing?
There's quite a few trends I think that's important to highlight when you take a look at, again, engaging others virtually. There is this virtual hybrid focus. Folks, they want to meet in person, can't necessarily do that, but yet they want to. But they also understand how we need to meet virtually, but we need to have that discussion that happens over time too, because these virtual discussions that folks are having, they're limited. You have, for an example, you have 10 people on a call, the call's 45 minutes long, maybe you hear from 1 or 2 of them. And so really that's why you have to be so thoughtful in what you're selecting and using as that virtual medium, right? Should we do in person? Should we do mostly all webcasting? Should we do mostly all overtime discussion? Or should we really mesh those together? And is that going to be the best option and moving forward for those participants that we're working with? We've seen that real-time trends that working and introducing each other through a webcast are what folks are craving. They still want that. They don't want too many. It's kind of like Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, right? Not too hot, no, not too cold, right? It's kind of the same way with Zoom calls. Not too many, not too little, just right. And so people are always scrambling, trying to figure out what fits best for everybody that's on the call and those that have been asked to participate. Now, what's nice about the overtime sessions, though, and this is a big trend that we're seeing, is that these overtime discussions, because they're easy to access and they're easy to use, what's great also is the amount of information that is pulled from that is just tremendous. So much greater as far as from a Zoom call, just because the amount of time that these take place over, there's so much information that's able to be gleaned and shared back and forth. And so we are seeing a trend moving in this direction as well. Now, what's also nice is that these trends, as far as virtual engagement goes, there's new ways of thinking. Now, COVID, as much as we love it or we hate it or dislike it, it did push us to think in ways that we've never thought of before. And so now we're applying the learnings over, I think, the past 12 to 15 months and really looking at how do we interact face-to-face from a cost standpoint, from interaction, from just data gathering to sharing information back and forth and so on. But again, I would say that these trends, these key bullet points here, Kim, are some of those that I often hear most and read about most often and probably post about most often on LinkedIn. So Kim, let's see here. You want to sit down? There we go. So let me ask you this question though. So what do these trends mean for your day-to-day?
It's interesting. I'm going to go back just really quick and kind of expand a little bit upon one of the things you said there, and something we talked about earlier today in our panel discussion was being able to engage your key stakeholders, engage your target audience, whether that's physicians, clinicians, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, whoever it might be. And social media seemed to be the thing that was talked about most during our panel discussion today, and how different companies are using social media with which to engage their target audience. That's a great way if you want to be able to have that kind of two-way discussion, physician talking to physician, asking questions, things like that. But it's really interesting is, do you really glean a lot of information from those just standard discussions, or do you still need to be able to ask specific questions and have those answers given back to you? I think one of the things that we did is we reacted in 2020 basically to the pandemic. And we suddenly went out and put in third-party apps. We tried to figure out ways of doing things. Very few companies actually had a virtual engagement strategy in place. So now we can look back, and hindsight's 2020. As my dad always said, is, hindsight's 2020. We can look back at 2020 and say, what did we learn? What was it that we learned, and how can we make a change moving forward? Because, Isaac, things are going to change. They're not going to remain the same. Face-to-face meetings will come back, but how do we complement those? How do we then engage our physicians after they've left, they've gone home, the dinners are over, the drinks are over, everybody's said goodbye, but you still wished you would have gotten a little bit more information, or you come up with a question to think, wow, I wish we would have asked that. So how do you expand that engagement opportunity, with those physicians, even after a face-to-face meeting or even after a webinar? Lastly, and the last two things is security and compliance. I think those are two big issues that people have to consider. It's very interesting out there because there's a lot of software platforms that were not necessarily made for healthcare, but are used in healthcare. And people are finding out that just may not be the way to go. And so what we want to make sure is that people understand is that are looking at a new platform, that it has the security and compliance features built into that platform and is ready to go. So, what are we going to do is we plan for the future. I mean, really, that is something that we now have the opportunity to say, well, we made a few mistakes, we learned a lot of things. Now let's plan for the next 5 years using what we gained over the past year. So Isaac, a quick question for you. What challenges did your clients mention most that they encountered this past year?
I think I was muted, guys. Sorry about that. Hey, I think the challenge that I saw most often was where are they going to meet for happy hour and how are they going to do it? So I think first off, people figured out how to do a Zoom happy hour. And once they figured that out, everything was okay. No, I'm joking, but really the challenges I could put into two buckets. Really was one external bucket and one internal bucket. And that external bucket was how are our clients meeting with and companies meeting with each other, right? How are they engaging folks? They went from a face-to-face engagement to all of a sudden, my gosh, we can't engage any longer. How are we going to do it? And what's the best way to go about doing it? What platform do we use? Do we use just a webcast, or we do it kind of a hybrid? How do we figure this out? What works most effectively? Really, there wasn't and hasn't been a lot of tried and true, I think, feedback on a lot of those platforms that we there, and available because we had never gone really through a pandemic like we did starting last year. Now, as far as engaging and following up with key KOLs, how were they, worried? They were worried about that, engaging sales reps with their key surgeons and so on. And how do we mesh that? How do we mesh then internal teams together? How do they continue to work with one another? That was a challenge that really I think folks were worried about. And do we simply just, add in a number of different Zoom calls or Teams meetings or web calls? Are we contacting people through email? Is that the best way to disseminate information? Are we slacking and instant messaging everybody? Really, and again, is that working? We don't know. I think, Kim, you and I would agree, and most people on this call today would agree that some did it better than others, and some ways of going about it were more effective than others, and that there were some real challenges that honestly we all had to deal with. And so, Kim, let me ask you this too. what opportunities then from these challenges are uncovered when clients rethink their virtual engagement strategy?
Well, there's some specific things that they have to think about, Isaac. One of those is with this opportunity and with the virtual opportunity we get, and also the addition of being able to have an overtime discussion, over a week or 2 or 3 week period of time, is you can expand your audience. We used to only have 5 or 10 people in a Zoom call because we knew that only about half of those would actually speak up. And man, we would have loved to have heard from everybody, but we didn't. Unfortunately, like I said, that last live in-person meeting I was at, 2 people out of 25 did 95% of the talking. And I asked one of my colleagues who was actually at that meeting, he recently finished his fellowship. He's now a professor at Stanford. And I said, why didn't you say anything? He goes, well, these guys had seniority. They were about ready to retire. And so, I didn't want to butt in and seem like I was trying to take over the meeting. I said, but Mike, you had a lot of really good things to say. And he goes, yeah, maybe I'll get a chance down the road. So now what we have the opportunity to do is, by being able to expand a conversation out over a period of time, is we're looking to get 100% participation, not just 50% or 75%, but 100% participation, which allows us to expand the audience. Instead of just 10 people, now we can have 30 people, and we could gain more information and more knowledge from it at that point in time. Also what it gives us the opportunity to do with an overtime discussion is have more, robust conversations and more thoughtful conversations. I don't know if you've ever been in on a Zoom call, Isaac, where you went, oh my gosh, I wish I would have said this, or man, I should have jumped in here and said something and then I didn't. Now we have the capability of being able actually to think about what we're going to say before we say it. We then give our opinion or our comment. And then if we do think of something really good later on, we can actually come back and add to that comment. One of our clients actually, with all of the questions that were asked in their overtime discussion, got all the questions answered by everybody in the room. And then they got 40% more information because people had a chance to think about it and come back and add to their answers. So now if you're getting more information, you now get more actionable insights with which to make changes, with which to change, marketing materials, with which to change your marketing strategy as you're launching a new product, your training and education strategies, with a new technique or a new procedure. So there are a lot of opportunities that have been uncovered over this last year and really over just the last few months. But one of the things that I really want to talk about and just mention, like I already said, is it allows you to include more people. So the inclusivity is actually going to be greater global connectivity. And what it does too, Isaac, is it gives those physicians a work-life balance. Time is money. They are backlogged now because of this last year. And the last thing they want to do is to have to take an hour out of their day for a Zoom call or get on an airplane and fly somewhere, even though we probably all are going to want to do that for a short period of time. But how would it be to be able to just come home, play with the kids, have dinner, and after everybody's in bed, then sit down and be part of an overtime discussion when it's convenient for you, not convenient for somebody else? So Isaac, last question I have for you too is, what advice would you give clients regarding security and compliance when they're, looking at a different platform with which to use?
That's a good question. I think there are a couple of things to keep in mind when it comes to security and compliance. And really what you want to do is make sure that the technology that is being used is built for the use, built that there's an end goal in mind and that the technology meets that end goal. So it's important to match the technology with both the activities and the end goal that's in mind, because there are a lot of technologies out there that probably say that they're secure and they're compliant, but they may not be as compliant or secure as needed for, let's say, those in the healthcare industry, one of the most highly regulated industries in the world. I think it's important too that we think about who the audience is and that how best to interact with these folks too. I think you made mention earlier of social media. Really, as far as secure and compliant, we all know some of the potential opportunities that are there, but also some potential probably security and compliance issues as well, right? That could come up when using a platform such as that. I think also what's important to keep in mind is that you need to have a platform where humans, there's still that interaction from human beings. Because we all know that there are issues and opportunities that come up, and that it's important to have a human being on that end, somewhere in the process, to make sure that they're the ones that are watching exactly what's being shared, what's going on back and forth behind the scenes, what is correct, what is incorrect, so on and so forth. And so, I would say that those are probably some of the bigger secure and compliance. Of course, you want a software that has been tried and tested and utilized, and have can share such things as case studies and analysis and things like that. But Kim, as far as security and compliance goes, that's probably some of the key findings that we've and advice, I guess, that I would give on something of that measure. So, but Kim, lastly, I wanted to ask you this question, and I think this is where a lot of thoughts and what folks on the line are really thinking of is, really, what are your thoughts and plans on the future of engaging medical device customers, not just here in the U.S., but also globally? Because we operate in a global environment. So,
it's a good thought, and one of the things that I hope everybody that's listening in on our presentation today, Isaac, will take home with them is the fact that to really plan out their new hybrid engagement model. What's it going to be? What's it going to look like? What are we trying to achieve? I think that's one of the issues that always seems to come up in a lot of the customers we talk with is, what is it we're trying to achieve? How do we want to engage our KOLs? How do we want to engage our internal stakeholders? And what are we looking to achieve by doing that? Can a Zoom call by itself do that? Quite possibly. Can a live in-person meeting accomplish that? Well, of course, that's what we were doing for years. But what if you were able to take all of those and mesh them together and mold them together so that you had an virtual engagement platform that was not just live, it was not just Zoom meetings, and it was not just an overtime discussion, but it was a hybrid engagement of all three of those, where you could keep somebody engaged for weeks and months at a time, as opposed to just an hour or 2 hours at a time. So I hope everybody will take a look at what they're trying to accomplish, number one. Number two, like you said, Isaac, is make sure that whatever platform you decide to work with, that it is secure, that it is compliant. Because as Isaac said, the healthcare industry is a highly, structured community, and we all need to be able to make sure that we're safe and secure as we're talking about new procedures or devices or techniques or whatever it might be. So I think for the future of engagement, we're going to see a little bit of everything, Isaac. I think we're going to see those in-person meetings again. I think we're going to see the virtual engagement again. As far as webinars and webcasts and things like that. And then we're going to see that anytime engagement, the overtime discussion, that's going to really allow people to dive deeper. And last but not least is data gathering. I think it was talked about a lot today, is the future of healthcare, at least on the medical device side, is gathering that data. And as Nick Wanless pointed out from Teleflex in our earlier discussion today, that data gathering is going to become more difficult as we proceed forward, just because of security. And so I think one of the things we have to look at is, if you're going to have this type of hybrid engagement model, we want to make sure that you're getting the data out of it that you absolutely need, not just pages and pages of transcripts, but actual data that can be usable data, that can help in your ROI, that can help in FDA submissions. We want to make sure the data you're getting is something that's going to be beneficial to you. And that's, again, I think something that everybody needs to be looking at, is how they're going to gather that data and how they're going to correlate that data to make sure that it works as good as it possibly can for them.